I'm old cheese. I'm old cheese. So you're going to have to get in the squad car tonight. Get in the squad car. The cat is in the studio. The cat is in the studio.
You're listening to Late Night Radio on the SHR Media Network. Caution, there will be mature themes explored and potentially adult language used. If conservatarian words, phrases, certain concepts, or rhetoric offends you, tune out now.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike?
You magnificent bastard, I read your book.
I drink your milkshake.
How dare you?
I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man.
Fill your hand, you son of a bitch.
Of course you realize this means war.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Well, this is it. This is the last show before the election. Hope I don't screw it up. Folks, it's Thursday night. It's 8:02 on the left coast. It's 11:02 on the east coast. And it's 1749 and 17.325 subparagraph 2, page 60 in Bolivian time. And I never understood Bolivian time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to BZ's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, where I'm broadcasting behind enemy lines in occupied California, always spelled with a K, a mere 2 miles east of the locus of evil in the entire left coast, the Bill Mill, the belly of the beast, the Capitol building in downtown Sacramento at 10th and L Street, where late at night you can hear the death of common sense. And at the end of the show, when I exit the plush, resplendent, and palatial SHR Media Studios through that door right over there, I'll be smelling the odoriferous stench of sulfur, brimstone, and evil emanating from that building in downtown Sacramento. Be forewarned, what you're about to hear for the next 2 hours consists of my opinion and my opinion only. And of course, because of the fear porn so rampant in the state of California today, always spelled with a K, the saloon is no longer open, but I'm still serving stiff drinks, facts, history, logic, rationality, proportion, context, tradition, intent, and common sense out the back door. We don't water our drinks just like we don't water our conversation, politics, religion, crime, culture, economics, race, sex, science, law. We talk about it all right here at the saloon, where the speech is free, but the booze still is not. This is 2020. I am done with bipartisanship and compromise. This is the new age of modern political warfare, because make no mistake, we are at war. And we have 5 days. 5 days to get your votes in, folks. Get your votes in. Please, if you haven't voted, do it. Don't listen specifically. Do not listen to what the pollsters are attempting to tell you. Although some of them, I'll be talking about this in the second hour, some of them are telling you some things that we didn't hear in 2016. And we all know what happened then. In the first hour tonight, I have Kate KRUZEWSKI. She is back in the saloon. So first off, Kate, welcome, and good to hear you. Good to have you here tonight, ma'am.
Thank you for having me back on your show. I look forward to talking.
Okay. If you could get closer to the phone, whatever that amounts to, and if you would speak up a little bit, because I have got you on full volume right here.
Is this better?
That's a little bit better. Loud always works, at least for whatever, in terms of this connection. So anyway, folks, I had Kate KRUZEWSKI on the air in June 30th of this year. So much has transpired since that amount of time. She is the owner and the creator of the Survive, Thrive, Stay Alive page on Facebook. And it's a private group. There are 406 members, and it's not a preppers page. It's some of that, but it's also knowing the things that people who want to be independent should know. All sorts of cool tips, agriculture, industrial, building, construction, you name it. She started that site. It's a great, great site. And Kate, if I'm not mistaken, we'll get into your background in just a moment, but if I'm not mistaken, you hosted basically a big get-together at your home in the mountains, and over the weekend, or at least within the past week. How did that go?
Oh, my goodness. We threw agenda out the window. We had all this stuff planned, and we just threw the agenda out the window, and everyone had a good time. We had about 22 people who showed, well, actually, we had 22 people who showed up, and oh, my goodness, we showed the kids that were here, we showed them what not to do when adults go rogue. We had a blast. We told ghost stories around the campfire. We hiked into Wampus Cat Holler to find the Wampus Cat Bigfoot. And we did all kinds of stuff. It was, and food. Oh my goodness, did I mention food? There was so much food. It was awesome.
So how many people did you end up having? Because essentially, obviously, this is a national blog, or excuse me, a national page, an international page for that amount. I think you're in the mountains of Kentucky?
That is correct. We're in the Appalachian Mountains.
And so, when you do that, when you invite people from everywhere, I would expect that, you might get 5 people. Locally, some guy threw a paranormal party and got like maybe 10, 15 people. How many folks did you happen to get from all around the nation who showed up?
22. We had 22.
And do you know who came the greatest distance?
I do. I believe Washington State was the greatest distance.
Wow. That's impressive. That in itself is really impressive. Well, folks, let's go into the background a little bit. I would highly recommend at the conclusion of this show tonight, go to bloviatingzeppelin.net, bloviatingzeppelin.net, and look for my show on June 30th of this year. And you'll have a little bit more understanding of who and what Kate KRUZEWSKI is. But because I've acquired some more people in the audience since then, Kate, could you kind of tell people a little bit about your background? We'll go into the incident itself and summarize that if we could. But I'd like to give people a background in terms of who you are, what you've done in your life, and some of the jobs and whatnot and places that you've gone and you've been.
Okay. To make a very long story short, because I only get an hour, when I was a very young, tender age, I was sold into human sexual trafficking, and I witnessed too many things at that time, and I do not talk about what I witnessed. I do not know if I even could talk about it or share, at least not at this point in time, until I'm emotionally stronger. And I'm an emotionally strong person, but there are some things that you just should not talk about.
You went into, during that show, for, if I'm not mistaken, for the first time, you did go into some depth about what happened to you when you were human trafficked. And again, we'll leave that for everybody to go see that particular show or listen to that particular show when you go back on June 30th. So that having been said, after that occurred, you have led a wide and varied and very eclectic life in terms of your jobs. You went into the military. Tell us about your going into the military, and then what kind of jobs and what things did you do after you got out of the military, please?
I went into the military. I went into the United States Army, and I became a military police officer. Not your basic be on post or base military police officer where you write tickets. I was what is called an escort unit, the 463rd Military Police Escort Unit out of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where we escorted and were private security for diplomats, presidents, royalty, anybody who came to the United States, or if we were overseas, we were their protection detail. I joined the Army and became a police officer because I wanted to stop human trafficking. The recruiter told me all kinds of promises, and of course, we all know recruiters are not honest, so I did not get to do. When I also became college educated while I was in the military as well. A company, Phoenix Federation LLC International, and what Phoenix is we trace, track, rescue, and extract victims of human trafficking, and we do what we need to do to the bad guy in arrest, of course.
Okay.
I can leave the rest up to y'all's imagination. We have traveled, Phoenix has traveled with teams worldwide with awareness in the 21st century, or A21.org, Project Beautiful, Operation Underground Railroad. We have not worked with Craig Sawyer for veterans against child trafficking. We would like to at some point in time, but he is mostly domestic, and we do not know much about domestic work here on United States soil. We've always mostly done most of our work internationally. There are not very many people who will do the international work because they do not know how. They do not know how to do the contracts. They do not know how to get teams together. I do not recommend anyone just getting a militia team or a team that thinks that they know what they are doing to go internationally or even domestically without the proper training. Because if you do not know what you are doing, you are going to get yourself hurt or killed, or your team hurt and killed. These people do not mess around.
So your background, if I can fill in a few slots here, your background is such that you've got a police background, you've got a military background, you have a training background, and then you used that and predicated upon the situation that you were personally involved in at the age of, I think, 13.
Correct.
And then built upon that, you built your own company. You're a business owner. You've learned how to meet a payroll. You're not a government parasite.
No.
You have created a business.
Correct.
Done all of these things in your background, and and again, I will not get into the details, but the aspect of that, there are 2 points that involve your family that I found absolutely fascinating in this. Someone in your family owed a debt. This occurred in Europe. In order to pay that debt, you were sold into human trafficking. That occurred for a period of time. Your grandfather assembled a team and then went and located you and extracted you.
My grandfather hired a team of mercenaries.
Okay.
To track. That is how I learned how to track, rescue, and extract.
Okay.
He hired a team of mercenaries to locate and rescue and extract.
But the additional complication of this was you're not in the United States.
Correct.
You don't have the advantage of anyone locally who would be able to help in the United States. This occurs overseas across the Atlantic in Europe under entirely different laws, entirely different circumstances, dealing with entirely different people with the mindset that would be requisite in terms of crafting things around human trafficking. And my guess would be that was just one aspect of the criminal enterprise that was involved in your doing this. So your grandfather having hired these people, would it be accurate, Kate KRUZEWSKI, to say this was a pretty complicated operation?
Absolutely. I do not know the intricate details of the mercenaries' operational plan at the time, and we all know that no matter what operational plan you have, the plans never go according to what you are trained and planned for in that specific operational plan. So you have to have several contingencies to that operational plan. I do not know their specifics, nor have I ever asked. When you are that young and impressionable, this is not like in 2020 when 13-year-olds are no longer virgins. Back in my day, because I'm older, back in my day, if you were not a virgin at 17, then you were classified as a slut. So from what I understand when I was trafficked, is there were individuals who were looking for specific little people, ranging anywhere from 3 months old to 17, 18 years old. And some of the young ladies and little people that I was around at the time, only 2 of us made it out alive.
So to be blunt, you were a highly valued commodity, because that's what you were. You were a commodity.
Correct.
Because of, my guess would be your origin, the fact that you were Caucasian, the fact that you were 13 years old, and the fact that you had not yet engaged in intercourse and you were a virgin, and that made you, all of those things made you very attractive to that market.
A blonde-haired, green-eyed little girl is what they were looking for.
So you were kidnapped in Greece, you were sold into human sexual trafficking in order to pay a familial debt, basically, if I'm remembering that correctly.
That is correct.
So yours, and again, folks, you got to go back. Go to bloviatingzeppelin.net. I'm not going to ask Kate to go over what she already talked about. And I was sufficiently blessed to have her talk to me about this back in June. This is not a story that I want to reinvent or visit here. But after you listen to her story, you're going to come to the immediate understanding that hers is an absolutely astounding tale of courage, fortitude, character, sheer force of incredible will. Kate KRUZEWSKI survived, joined the military, built her own company, one whose job it was to liberate and rescue victims of human trafficking. And now that I've set that tone, that's what I want people to understand. What happened to you, and then how that motivates you to do what you've done with your life. So now that we've set that platform, you contacted me about 3 or 4 days ago on social media, and you said, I have a different and unique tale, and I'd like to share it with you, and that's why you're on tonight. It has something to do about human trafficking, but I have to tell you, folks, she has not told me this tale, so I don't know specifically what it involves, but because of her incredible fortitude, what she's done with her life, my guess would be this is something worth listening to. So, Kate KRUZEWSKI, what happened recently?
What if I told you that there is someone in your backyard that is strongly possible into human trafficking? What if I told you someone in my backyard is? Allegedly.
And
throw that in.
And when you say backyard, you mean in your neighborhood? In kind of the area where you live?
Correct. A very close proximity, almost too close. Because we have to investigate when we are contracted to find a little person. We take about 2 weeks. Sometimes it usually takes a little bit longer, but we find a common denominator. And let's just say, for example, you contact Phoenix Federation International. We are also now domestic here in the United States. But you contact us and you say, my granddaughter has been missing for 72 hours. The cops aren't doing anything about it. We know she did not run away. That 72 hours is killer to us. A lot of people do not know that companies like ours exist, A21, Phoenix, Operation Underground Railroad. All of these places, a lot of people do not know that we exist. But when they do contact a detective can say, we cannot do anything for 72 hours. It's only been 24 hours since your child has been missing. Contact these people. When you contact us and we sign a contract with you, we go back into that child's life for about 6 months. Usually there is a common denominator with that child. Once we find that common denominator, it usually takes about 2 weeks to go back 6 months. Once we find that common denominator, then we can start tracing that common denominator where that child is concerned. 99.9% of the time, that common denominator is the contact for that, the first contact for that child in human trafficking.
Okay, say that again so people understand. That's a rather remarkable stat. Say that again, please, Kate KRUZEWSKI.
99% of the time, when we find a common denominator where a missing child is concerned, that common denominator is the first contact of the individual of human trafficking. What I mean by that is, say, for example, your next door neighbor has had contact with your granddaughter. Okay, your next door neighbor is allowed to have contact with your granddaughter, but what we have discovered is that your next door neighbor has had contact with your granddaughter 5 times in one day. Not only telephonically, but online, coming next door, giving her cookies, being overly nice. There's nothing wrong with your neighbor being overly nice, but when you're being overly nice 5 to 6 times a day for, say, 6 months, there's an issue. So we start looking into this common denominator. Let's look at your neighbor. Well, what is going on? Well, your neighbor does not want anyone around his home. You have acreage. He has acreage. Well, his acreage is a little bit larger than your acreage, and that's okay. We don't mind that. But he does not want anyone near or around his acreage. He will shoot you. No issues. But he has little people all over his acreage, or he has parties all over his acreage. There's nothing wrong with that. You're allowed to have parties on your own acreage, but not when you have little people up there with adult parties.
So Kate KRUZEWSKI, who we're speaking to tonight, who herself was a victim of human trafficking at the age of 13. If you want to go listen to her story, it was an incredible story of massive courage. Go to bloviatingzeppelin.net and go to June 30th of 2020. You can hear her story. But you've gotten into investigations. One of the things that everybody involved in investigations knows that you don't take everything in isolation. You're looking, as you've been indicating so far, for a totality of circumstances that would tend to lead you in a particular direction and give a reasonable person or cause a reasonable person to have some sort of suspicion with all of these various and sundry elements assembled together. So you look at one aspect and then you spread out the investigation, and then you discover that there are any number of threads that are having a common linkage. Would that be accurate?
That is very accurate. Let's say your neighbor is extremely wealthy, sickeningly wealthy. And let's say that your neighbor has ties to, let's say, people like Hunter Biden. And let's say your neighbor has been on an airplane with a recently suicided individual who was in jail, who had an island somewhere, who that's what he did on his island, was he entertained the elite with young girls.
Okay.
Let's say that your neighbor has a judge or two from his county in his back pocket. So no matter what he does, he may not be very bright, but he does have money to get him out of legal situations. And let's say this is just the tip of the iceberg, and all of this can be proven.
Okay. we're going to have to hold it right there for a couple of minutes, not 5 or 10 minutes or so. We're going to take a break, come right back. Folks, we're talking to Kate KRUZEWSKI, who was a victim of human trafficking herself at the age of 13. And apparently she's telling us a story indicating that human trafficking is very close to her, where she lives, after having been a fighter of human trafficking herself, having her own business. When we come back, I'd like to talk more about that and see if she has some details and some revelations that I'm hoping will open your eyes tonight, folks.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Hey, are you guys listening? This is Shannon from Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM on SHR Media. I know you've been wondering where we are and what's been going on. Well, folks, that's right. We're back. So please join us 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday on SHR Media, on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, and Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM at Facebook. You don't want to miss a minute. We've got lots of guests, lots of segments, and lots of interesting things. And let's face it, there's nowhere for you to go, so you might as well tune in. Again, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. We're back live on the air on SHR Media, 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday, audio and Facebook Live, audio and video. Yes, we are going to do video. Facebook Live, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. Hope to see you soon.
From a public locker inside a dilapidated Long Island rail station comes a show designed to piss off liberals using truth, facts, and ridicule. The Lid Radio Show, featuring the conservative voice from the People's Republic of New York, the Lid himself, Jeff Dunitz. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on the SHR Media Network. Go to shrmedia.com. At Lid Radio, we fight for the truth, justice, and a good kosher T-bone. If you don't listen, Hillary Clinton might sneak into your bedroom in her housecoat late at night and blame you for her election loss. It's the Lid Radio Show with Jeff Dunitz.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are back. If you're listening on Spreaker, please share this out. If you're on YouTube, please share this as well. If you happen to be on Facebook, which I'm not, because I've been killed for 30 days on Facebook, hey, share that out too if you would. Today is 5 days until the election. 5 more days, folks. Get out and vote. Get out and vote red. For the first hour, I have been talking to Kate KRUZEWSKI, and she has been human trafficked. She was human trafficked at the age of 13, and has apparently made a discovery that human trafficking, she went around the world to fight it, but apparently human trafficking is a lot closer now to her than she suspected. So, Kate, what's going on?
I did not think anything about the parties going on for the last 2 years because we did not witness too much. This individual was very secluded up there, up on a mountaintop, extremely secluded. So we didn't think anything of it. You know, he is minding his own business, so to speak, etc. But just recently, we were in contact with the highest authority in my county, and when we were discussing some things with him, we were explaining that we sometimes are contracted with the Department of Defense for tracing, tracking, rescuing, extracting victims of human trafficking. And the confession was made that, oh, you do realize that this area is a hub for human human trafficking, which we already knew that, but to have this confession from this highest form of law enforcement kind of threw us, because if he is the highest form of law enforcement, why isn't he doing anything about it? And then he made the confession that he frequents up at this individual's home. And then it was time to close mouth and continue to listen. And that is when we decided to, as the CEO of the company, I decided to contact a friend of mine and ask for just a small 1 or 2 day investigation, just to see if my suspicions were correct. And if they were not correct, then I'd just drop it, walk away. If my suspicions were correct, then something needs to be more investigated. And just in a 2-day this guy is very sloppy, and just in a 2-day investigation, it has been confirmed that this individual has had strong ties with Hunter Biden, like I mentioned, and with Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay, so when you think, and I know this is not accurate, but when people think of human trafficking, my assumption is that they would think of places like California, perhaps Florida, because Florida has a large coast and has an ability for people to bring folks in, get people out, etc. Maybe the state of New York. Big states like that. My first guess is I'm not going to think immediately, Kentucky. That's not where my brain goes. My guess would be there's a really good reason for people doing this kind of thing in Kentucky, because they're assuming that people are thinking, as I just indicated.
Every state within the borders of the United States has hubs of human trafficking. Every single state. It does not matter if it's California, New York, Kentucky, Maine, Arkansas, Midwest, Kansas. It does not matter. Every state has human trafficking. And human trafficking, it does not necessarily mean that a little girl or a little boy is kidnapped. Human trafficking can also be, and let me reiterate this, a 74-year-old man just across the border in Ohio, which is just 8 miles away from where I live. He was arrested. He's an attorney. He was arrested because it was discovered that for decades, in order for him to work on certain young ladies' cases, criminal cases, before he would allow them in court to win their cases, they had to have sexual encounters with certain elite individuals. This is a 74-year-old attorney who's been doing this for decades, and he was just arrested a week ago.
Kate KRUZEWSKI, rather illuminating. But the funny thing is, I would guess, and I'd like your opinion on this, a lot of this people are not hearing about. And I would guess that the reason that you wanted to be here tonight is to say something similar to, folks, wake up. This is all around you. If this can be in my backyard, this can be in your backyard. And if it may be in your backyard, perhaps particularly if you have children, family members, it would behoove you to become much more aware of the circumstances, literally, in your own backyard. And Kate KRUZEWSKI, I'd like to make 4 observations that people are not understanding. And then I'd like your comments on these as well. It's out there in the media, but people are not talking about it. And I want to ask you why, because I think you know why. The Marshals, the U.S. Marshals, have been making an astounding recovery of a great number of children this year in 2020. For example, October 1st, U.S. Marshals recover 11 children in New Orleans in Operation Summer Rescue. U.S. Marshals recover 8 missing endangered children in Indianapolis. That's August 31st to September 4th. U.S. Marshals find 39 missing children in Georgia during Operation Not Forgotten, August 27th. And then, most recently, October 26th, just 3 days ago, U.S. Marshals recover 45 missing children in southern Ohio and southern West Virginia.
Which is directly across the border from me. Literally.
But people are not paying attention to this. It's
The media will not report on it. The media will not report on it. And in my opinion, I will tell you why.
Okay.
I am an expert in only one thing, and that is my opinion. That is, the media wants to protect the elite. Who pays the media? The media. The elite does. They are going to do everything they can to protect the elite instead of reporting the truth of what is actually happening out there. And it just makes me angry. I am tired of the defiling of our children and the grooming them with sick perversion, the child rape, the trafficking that feeds it. It is time to say enough. And as long as I have breath, I will fight it. I will fight against the media. What are they going to do to me? They're going to call me a liar. They're going to call me all kinds of names. Well, I've already been called names. I've already been called a liar. I don't care. As long as I know what the truth is and I go out there and I expose it, I don't care what the media says. It is time to band together and work to save our children. You may have, and I'm not just talking to you, BC, it's the listeners. You may have children or grandchildren out there. You may have nieces or nephews out there. If you can recognize the signs when you walk into a grocery store, I'm not saying be paranoid, but if you walk into a grocery store and there is somebody going down every aisle that you go down and watching your child, open your eyes. There are so many people in the Target parking lot, in the grocery store parking lot, in the Walmart parking lot that sit out in SUVs and vans and watch specific families go into a store, and they have an order for a specific child. They see, say, blonde hair, green eyes.
So we need
see that child. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We need to understand, folks, and one of the major reasons that Kate KRUZEWSKI is here tonight is the days of your child being abducted by someone who wants to make your child an individual sexual toy, and it's only dealing with one person, those days are predominantly over. Now, it's a business, a multi-billion-dollar business where suspects can order off a menu. And then it's the job of various individuals to fill these orders. It's a business.
It is, from what we have calculated so far, over a $65 billion a year industry worldwide.
I found this on the U.S. Marshals Service at usmarshals.gov. Over the past 5 years, the U.S. Marshals Service has recovered missing children in 75% of the cases it's received. And of those recovered, 72% were recovered within 7 days. Again, pointing out, Kate, the criticality of time, getting going on a case as soon as possible. Since 2005, the U.S. Marshals Service has recovered more than 2,000 missing children. The Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act of 2015 enhanced the U.S. Marshals authority to assist federal, state, and local law enforcement with the recovery of missing, endangered, or abducted children, regardless of whether a fugitive or a sex offender was involved. But that's, can you, Kate KRUZEWSKI, can you tell us the scope of the problem? Recovering more than 2,000 missing children, is that just the tip of the iceberg?
Oh, good Lord. My goodness. That is not even the tip. Just in, oh, good Lord. I would say, and I could honestly say, that within, let's just say, Kentucky, if you look at the statistics of how many missing children in Kentucky, you can probably 90% of those children are abducted. The rest of them are runaways, or they just have not come home from school for a couple of days, and then 4 days later they come home. And I would say 90% of the children in any state that have gone missing are abducted.
And that's diametrically opposed to what I was involved in when I was a child abuse detective in the 1990s. That has been turned on its head. That's the fewest number of children. Now they're all sought for human trafficking. So now that we've established a baseline, now is there any more information that you have about that particular story involving the individual that you think is aligned to other individuals recently in the news, to possibly include Epstein, to possibly including Biden?
The news that I can give you at this point in time is he knows what we do here. He knows what I retired from, and he has come against us in a legal type of way. Not because I'm mentioning his name, because I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
He is, since our property adjoins his property, he is trying to legally steal our property. And what I mean by legally steal is he gets you in court and says, oh, I own this piece of property and you are too close to my property and I don't want you trespassing on my property, and for punitive damages, I want a quiet title deed to all of your property. And he gets it. Only this time he is not going to be able to. We are not bullied that easy. He has bullied too many people. They succumb to whatever it is that he wants because he's rich and powerful. And I have news for people like that. I'm coming after you.
Which is, to be clear, because my guess would be you have access to far greater resources, individuals with the requisite training, education, and experience in order to deal with situations and persons directly similar to this. Would that be accurate?
That is very true. Very accurate. He has no idea the Pandora's box that he just opened when the individual that was served, I was not served, but someone who lives on my property was served, and he was served by the sheriff himself, which was a request from this individual that the sheriff serve us because they're really good friends. This individual took the paperwork from the sheriff and made it clear, you need to go back and ask this individual, are you sure that this is what you want to do? He was very clear and concise in his verbiage, and then he made it clear, if this continues, this will not stay in circuit court. It will go federal. Again, are you sure this is what you want to do?
Folks on Netflix, I don't know if you have Netflix, and as a matter of fact, I asked Kate this a couple of days ago. If you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, or you haven't seen The Hack, you need to see those. Plus there's, oh gosh, maybe you can tell me this, and I should have had this information at my fingertips before I got here, but there is a documentary about an hour and a half from a Hollywood stuntman who has got involved into Pizzagate, etc., which led to any number of situations. But your situation right there, having watched a number of these documentaries and having the various revelations involving Epstein come out, the ex-Epstein these days, and then whatever happens in the future with Ghislaine Maxwell, this situation that you're describing now seems remarkably similar to one that was described in various documentaries involving a sheriff of a county in Florida who knew Epstein, who Epstein was providing equipment, etc., to this individual. I'm not saying this particular sheriff was involved in corruption, but the linkage and the questions should certainly be there. So with the information that you have, are you formulating any future steps, perhaps?
We are. We are definitely forming future steps. I have stepped back I'm not stepped back from the investigation, but I have stepped back from this individual in the situation because I am so personally involved. I am an action person and not much of a reaction person, and my instincts tell me that it is smarter for me to back off than it is to get involved because I do not want to jeopardize this investigation in any way. Where this sheriff in my county is concerned, I am understood that he is an honest man, and that if he knew 100%, if he knew that his friend was involved, then I believe that he would take action against his friend. With that being said, you were talking about documentaries. Craig Sawyer has a documentary out. I believe it's like an hour and a half-ish, maybe hour 15 minutes. It's called Contraland.
Contraland, okay.
Contraland, and it explains in explicit detail what social media does to lure in children. It explains in detail how people can watch for their children and try to keep them safe. What is sad is 1 out of 2 children that are missing. These are the statistics in the United States. 1 out of 2 children that are missing are trafficked. Those are not very good statistics in our country.
I'm going back to chat, and Simone in chat has nailed the the movie or the documentary that I'm talking about. She said it's called Out of Shadows, and I had forgotten about that. I had seen it, but I forgot the title. Sergeant Booker also indicated in the SHR Media chat, I canceled Netflix over Cuties. That's been out as well. So does it not seem that at least in 2020 and these days recently, all of this is hiding in plain sight? It's right in front of our faces, but we need to be aware of it.
They are desensitizing the public. They hit the court of public opinion, and they are desensitizing the court of public opinion to children that it is okay in, I forget which state it is now, but it is okay to have sexual relations with a child 10 years younger than you. So if you are 18 years old and you want to have sex with an 8-year-old, it's legal. That's in the United States. They are desensitized, and the media is not even touching on it. They have desensitized and are continuing to desensitize the American people that, it's okay.
I could go on this for hours and hours and hours. We're going to have to wrap it up in a little bit. I put in the SHR Media chat, folks, look up what the acronym MAP means. There are now MAPs and no MAPs. And as Kate indicates, this kind of behavior, there is a massive, fervent attempt to normalize it, to make it as though it were acceptable. The community of, this is a MAP. It's a community, as they describe themselves, of non-offending pedophiles who describe themselves as MAPs or no MAPs. They're using online media as various support groups. MAP means a minor attracted person. So if you see that in the future, these clues are all there for you to see, folks. If you see the term MAP, that stands for a minor attracted person, or a no MAP is called a non-offensive minor attracted person, is that their social media profiles, they use it to find each other online. It's everywhere. Be aware not only of what's happening around you, be aware. And folks, Americans, I get it. It's 2020. You're just trying to damn survive. But this stuff is out here. So
it's not going to happen to my child.
No.
I won't let it happen to my child. It will never happen to my child.
And that must be the mindset that you take. So let's summarize this way.
May I say something real quick?
Sure.
Can I say something real quick?
I want you to have the final word. And the final word is, can you summarize your reason for being here tonight?
To get the word out. If it can happen in my backyard, my next door neighbor, it can and will happen in your backyard, your next door neighbor.
Exactly. What also were you going to say?
I watched a video this evening from Operation Underground Railroad. The video illustrates a conversation with a human trafficked survivor and her friend, and why asking of just a simple question that I can relate to, what is your favorite color, may not always provide the simple answer. And I can totally relate to, once you have been recovered from human trafficking, color is, just a simple question, what is your favorite color, is just, I encourage everyone to go to Operation Underground on YouTube and just look at what is your favorite color on this YouTube. It's a performance in a video of a woman with her experience talking to a trafficked person, and she was given the opportunity to hear stories from trafficked survivors from her state of Oklahoma, and she was inspired by the idea of the privilege of knowing what their favorite color was. But she did not understand, and she ignorantly assumed that if they say blue is my favorite color because of the sky or whatever, we correlated colors to keep ourselves alive. And talking about colors and the vivid of the colors triggers certain emotions in trafficked human beings. She says that she wanted to invite the listener into the brokenness of redemption. Redemption is messy, and it's often full of scars. To any survivors, this is what I want to say to any survivors who may be listening, no matter what your scars are or where you have been, and I am not just talking about human trafficking, I'm talking about whatever you have gone through. I hope that you're inspired to believe that God has not forgotten you, nor have I, and I will fight for you, and that God has created you with value far beyond any way others have treated you.
Kate KRUZEWSKI, thank you very much for being here tonight. When you discover any more information about your situation or any other topics that you'd like to talk about, you're certainly obviously welcome back here anytime. Someday, I'd like to do a show about what happened to me when I was a detective working child abuse, and also about the blog Absolute Zero United. Okay. And a lot of what happened there. It's been under our nose for years and years and years, for decades. It's bigger, larger, more rampant, and even more profitable than you can ever imagine. It was much smaller when I was conducting investigations in the 1990s. It is over the top with profitability in 2020 and will continue to be so.
A child is more lucrative than drugs nowadays. So now even the cartels, the drug cartels from all over the world are getting into human trafficking, because you can sell drugs one time. You can sell a child multiple times.
And a perfect example of that. I'd love to have you back. The chaos of the election, what's coming up, you're in a perfect place right now to be able to sort of isolate yourself to what I think is going to happen after November 3rd. When things have died down a little bit, either literally or figuratively, I would like to have you back, Kate KRUZEWSKI, so that we can continue with this conversation and about the topic in general, because my guess would be you have so many stories involving situations that people literally have no idea exist on the planet, much less here in the United States of America. So thank you.
I would be honored.
So thank you so kindly, Kate KRUZEWSKI, for being here tonight and for staying up so late, because right now you're on Eastern Time and it's 12:03. It's 3 minutes after midnight. So thank you for staying up so late.
No problem.
Thank you, Kate. God bless. Take care.
God bless.
And we will be right back, folks, with more after this.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
It is he that is me, bringing perspective from across the sea. Join me, Jack Alexander, 4 days a week for the Jack Alexander Experiment podcast, as I take a unique outsider's look at the news and issues affecting life and liberty here in the USA. I'll show you what the mainstream media refuses to. Politics, border security, defense, healthcare, travel, nothing is off limits. Catch the Jack Alexander Experiment podcast each Monday to Thursday on Facebook, YouTube, and everywhere good podcasts can be found. Also, check out the website, www.jackalexanderexperiment.com.
It's your business diva here, Melanie Collette. I am inviting you to a front row seat as I discuss some of the most intriguing details of wealth and finance with today's movers and shakers in the world of business. Listen in and discover financial truths on a global, domestic, and household scale. Uncover topics that will impact your wallet today and in the future. Money Talk with Melanie airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. East, 2 p.m. West, right here on SHR Media and High Plains Pundit Talk Radio. You can't afford to miss it.
After 6 years covering terror and corruption, the Unpleasant Blind Guy is making a change. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker and YouTube through SHR Media and on the Western Free Radio Network as I team up with Jeff Mitchell, host of the English Defense League radio show on blogtalkradio.com. Check show pages for airtimes. It's the Unpleasant Blind Guy.
On EBL Radio.
There's
no surrender, ever.
Because truth is not always pleasant.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for listening tonight to the Bloviating Zeppelin. That is I, one each. Zeppelin, bloviating. The Mark I Model 1 Zeppelin, as a matter of fact. Not Zepp 2.0. Put that right out. Not Zepp 2.0. For the first hour, we spoke to Kate KRUZEWSKI. She was here originally to tell her story about being trafficked herself. Go to bloviatingzeppelin.net, and then in the search area, just put her name, Kate KRUZEWSKI. Or if you just put Kate, K-R-U-S, because you might have a little difficulty spelling KRUSZEWSKI, just put Kate, K, or KRUS. And you'll get the post, you'll get the blog, listen to the show. If you think this was engaging and fairly astounding, you ain't heard nothing yet. I'm going to go into some interesting points before I get into what a Biden presidency is going to look like. There's some very interesting things that emerged recently that I didn't tell you about. I didn't have the opportunity to tell you about. This past Tuesday, Rasmussen reports came out today, well, yesterday, if you happen to be on the East Coast, morning data points. The question in Rasmussen was, if the presidential election was held today, would you vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden? So this is sampling the National Daily Black Likely Voter Percentile for POTUS. On Monday, it was 27%. On Tuesday, it was 30%. On Wednesday, it was 30%. On Thursday, it was 31%. If you listen to Larry Elder and or Leo Terrell 2.0, both of these individuals have been saying something. This is a story from the New York Post. Information on Shock of Shocks, Hunter Biden. That's just 1 week after the Post's exposés. So people are wanting to change their votes because of that. Here's another thing that I'm sure that you have not heard trumpeted from the very halls of D.C., and this is purposeful. It's official. President Trump crushed the record for the largest GDP increase in U.S. history. Our third quarter GDP, despite the coronavirus, is up 33.1%. And also, if you have the time, the New York Post has a great article that just came out. Twitter is running a blackmail operation. Cooperate, or there's no traffic for you. So for all their talk of neutral platforms, big tech, Twitter, Facebook, Google, they are basically running a mafia protection racket. They believe, and so far there's no one there to stop them, they can dictate what Americans get to see and read and what other media companies must do in order to reach that platform, the public, via their platforms. So I found this out from Sackhead Sean just before the show. The New York Post has decided that if it's going to place an article, for example, on, say, Twitter, You're going to not read the article. You're going to see a video, and the video will scroll at a rate that you can read the story, but it's being portrayed on a video because their analytics at this point look for keywords, not for active videos. Yeah, that's how stupid it's getting in the United States of America. Speaking of America, welcome to your coming America, courtesy of Democrats and leftists. Because if elected, boy, do they have some punishment and retribution in mind for you, conservatives, and anybody who voted for Donald Trump. Not necessarily Republicans, mind you, because if, like, Mitt Romney, they displayed actions indicating they weren't in favor of Trump and actually spoke out against him. See, those people, those Republicans, they're okay. So Romney was virtue signaling to Democrats and leftists saying, look at me, don't slay me, I'm one of you guys, I'm a good guy. This is also known as auditioning for a nice, fat, comfy appointment or a role maybe in the Biden administration because he wanted to be Secretary of State in the Trump administration, and Donald John Trump, OMB, the guy with the dead orange cat on his head, said no. This is Mitt Romney saying he doesn't think the role of government is investigating Biden's corruption. I told you about that on Tuesday. Republican Senator Mitt Romney, oh, that is so sad, sharply criticized an investigation by his own party into Democrat presidential nominee Joe Biden's son. Romney actually said this. It's not the legitimate role of government to try and damage political opponents. Okay, let's analyze that statement just for a second, okay? So you see, it was acceptable to open investigation on now President Trump before an election. Perfectly understandable, you see. Anything else involving the other party, not so much. Terrible, reprehensible. No. So, as you guys realize, I speak leftist, so I'll translate. If any incident that smells and looks like massive dripping corruption on the part of Democrats happens to occur involving anybody running for any seat, said corruption should readily be ignored and dismissed. Let me be even more clear. This is what this means. Everybody in D.C. has a political opponent. It's called politics. It's D.C. So what he's saying is no more investigating anything bad involving Democrats or leftists because, according to them, well, the spineless empty suits like Mitt Romney, that shit's off the table. That just won't fly. Why? Because it involves a political opponent. Newsflash, everything in D.C. involves a political opponent, comma, you asshole. So Republicans like Romney are okay for the moment. I said this before, but I learned definitely something from a teacher named Mr. Harms in my 60s civics class. What he said was Democrats don't win elections, Republicans lose them. In my opinion, because I said that at the beginning of the show, Republicans desire altogether way too much to be loved and adored. They fear the appearance of judgment. What they fail to understand is that these days they're automatically at no matter what they do, and we hate you. And they're not going to progress beyond that. They don't understand that they literally have nothing to lose by going primeval, telling as much cold truth as possible, coming up with Democrat veins between their teeth. Democrats and leftists despise the Constitution. Even dead leftist SCOTUS jurists didn't like the Constitution when they were alive, and it was their job to embrace it as a Constitution. So I speak leftist, as you well know. So this is basically what RBG meant. The U.S. Constitution limits government on its face.
Would Your Honor's advice be that a society like ours, with what we like to call a transition to the Second Republic, would Your Honor's advice be to get a part or use other countries' constitutions, maybe the United States or other countries, as a model, or we come up with our own methods and our own draft?
You should certainly be aided by all the Constitution writing that has gone on since the end of World War II. I would not look to the U.S. Constitution if I were drafting a Constitution in the year 2012.
That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose job it is to enforce the Constitution, thinking that the thing she's tasked with abiding by is something that is essentially bad. She said it. Leftists and Democrats despise the Bill of Rights. Anything to do with free speech, it's got to be eliminated, unless it's the proper speech, their speech. The entire Second Amendment has got to go. Ripped out wholesale. The rest of the Bill of Rights are in jeopardy as well. They just get in the way of a good leftist takeover of government. Make no mistake, that's what it's about. Because the goal is to Californicate, always spell it with a K, the entire United States in perpetuity. That is to say, there is one party rule in California right now, always spell it with a K, that is purposeful and that is absolute. I'm unsure this election is going to make much of a dent in that lock, but at least major attempts are being made, if by nobody else than Eric Regard, who has been on the studio 5 times just this year. If leftists and Democrats can, of course, those chosen will not proffer decisions based upon the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, but upon their wishes in terms of what the Constitution and Bill of Rights should say if it were actually written properly. A Biden presidency, you must realize, is also going to create a minimum of 2 to possibly 3 new states out of D.C., Puerto Rico. I would say those 2 definitely, maybe even Guam. They have as much said so. They threatened. That means potentially there could be as many as 4 to 6 new senators, 2 from each new country, and you can rest assured they'll all vote Democrat. Why, BZ? All of them. 4 to 6 bright, shiny Democrats beholden to the Democrat Party for creating their positions and bestowing their newfound power. But BZ, what about this retribution of what you speak? This is an article, August 16th. Does America need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? A Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What does that say to you? Oh, that's right. Something kind of on the order of a pogrom. Look that word up. They've worked in other countries, they say, in the middle of a national reckoning on race. Some advocates are wondering, well, why not here? Why not in the United States of America? In a South African courtroom in 1995, a woman let out a scream as bone-chilling as its distillation of anger, injustice, and grief that decades later still rings in the ears of those who were present. The woman was Nomande Kalata, who was 26 years old and pregnant with her 3rd child in 1985 when her husband, the school teacher and anti-apartheid activist, was abducted and brutally assaulted by apartheid government security forces. So what these people are saying with a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that the United States is like South Africa. So let me make this comparison in case you haven't clued in by the second paragraph. The South African courtroom is like the U.S. courtroom that needs to be convened because President Trump and those who voted for him, you guys are all responsible. You killed people, blacks mostly, and each of you need to be brought to a trial, held to answer, and at minimum, you need to be re-educated en masse. The implication is there, and it's really, really clear. In countries around the world, the public airing of stories like Coladas has been seen as a necessary way to acknowledge and ultimately move past systemic injustices. Systemic, remember that word, like the systemic racism, air quotes, that exists in the United States and in law enforcement nationally, bleat leftists who couldn't care less about the actual statistics, the facts, or the truth. Systemic racism is a myth. Just as the entire Black Lives Matter program, terrorist and racist in nature, is predicated upon the naked lie of hands up, don't shoot. So by forcing and pushing this kind of reconciliation, which is actually retribution, leftists push the trope of systemic racism or whatever else they deem fit, because that's all they can see. That's all they got. 24/7, race and sex, sex and race. So it's clear that there will be retribution and punishment if President Trump wins a second term or doesn't win a second term. Wait, if he loses, that means the floodgates are open. Wow, how wonderful. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has no problem threatening people. Do you remember that he said this? He was on record as threatening U.S. jurists, Supreme Court jurists, earlier this year. This is Chucky Schumer. So, Chuck, what were you saying?
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Yeah, let's to generations yet unborn is really rich, considering that little Chucky Schumer, there isn't an abortion that he doesn't love. The hypocrisy in this asshole is legion.
This late hour, at the end of this sordid chapter.
So he's butthurt about Judge Amy Coney Barrett being confirmed.
In the history of the Senate, the history of the Supreme Court, my deepest and greatest sadness is for the American people.
Right.
Generations yet unborn will suffer the consequences.
Generations yet unborn will suffer the consequences. When has he ever given one dribbling fuck about the unborn?
Of this nomination. As the globe gets warmer, as workers continue to fall behind, as unlimited dark money floods our politics, as reactionary state legislatures curtail a woman's right to choose, gerrymander districts, and limit the rights of minorities to vote, my deepest, greatest, and most abiding sadness tonight is for the American people and what this nomination will mean for their lives, their freedoms, their fundamental rights. Monday, October 26th, 2020, it will go down as one of the darkest days in the 231-year history of the United States Senate. I yield.
There is also rich hypocrisy in what he says and the threats he makes, considering that historically, this is not what they want you to know. He couldn't be more inaccurate. As a guy named Dan McLaughlin wrote, history supports Republicans filling the seat. Fill the seat. Doing so would not be in any way inconsistent with Senate Republicans holding open the seat vacated by Justice Antonin Scalia in 2016. The reason is simple, and it was explained by Mitch McConnell at the time back then. Historically, throughout American history, when their party controls the Senate, presidents get to fill Supreme Court vacancies at any time. It's constitutional. Even in a presidential election year, even in a lame duck session after the election, even after defeat. Historically, when the opposite party controls the Senate gets to block Supreme Court nominees sent up in a presidential election year, and they hold the seat open for the winner. Both of those precedents are settled by experience as old as the Republic. Republicans should not create a brand new precedent to deviate from that stuff. Democrats and leftists count on the American people, you, me, having what I term historical Alzheimer's, just like they do. You want the facts? Here are the facts. 29 times in American history there have been open Supreme Court vacancies in a presidential election year, 29 times, or in a lame duck session before the next presidential inauguration. And that also counts vacancies created by new seats on the court, but not vacancies for which there's been a nomination already pending when the year before, such as happened in 1835, 1836, and 1987, 1988. The president made a nomination in all 29 cases. George Washington did it 3 times. You didn't hear that. John Adams did it. Thomas Jefferson did it. Abraham Lincoln did it. Ulysses S. Grant did it. Franklin Roosevelt did it. Dwight Eisenhower did it. Barack Obama, of course, did it. 22 of the 44 men to hold the office faced this situation, and all 22 made the decision to send up a nomination whether or not they had the votes in the Senate. It's constitutional. The Democrats are lying to you. Don't buy it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I point this out, she said she doesn't favor court packing. She said in an interview she doesn't favor proposals put forth by some Democrat presidential candidates who advocated the changing of the number of Supreme Court justices if the Democrats win the presidency. This is a quote. 9 seems to be a good number. It's been that way for a long time. I think it was a bad idea when President Franklin Roosevelt tried to pack the court. Several Democrat candidates have indicated an openness, if they were to win the presidency, to adding the number of justices on the Supreme Court to reduce the power of the current conservative majority. Some even want to exact term limits for Supreme Court judges. The term limits proposal doesn't worry Ginsburg because she thinks it's unrealistic, given that the Constitution specifies life terms for federal judges, and because, as she puts it, the Constitution is powerfully hard to amend. Yet it appeared RBG is hallowed and followed only when it's convenient for the Democrats. If not, she won't even be mentioned at all. Wait a minute. As a refresher, wasn't it also Barack Obama who said...
What's to happen now? When there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court, the President of the United States is to nominate someone. The Senate is to consider that nomination. And either they disapprove of that nominee or that nominee is elevated to the Supreme Court. Historically, this has not been viewed as a question.
Isn't that odd? Isn't that rich? Barack Obama, a holder of historical Alzheimer's himself, saying that historically, well, if there's a vacancy, no matter the period of time, in a given president's term, do it, fill the seat.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Southern Sense is conservative talk with Annie, the radio chick you bellows as host, and C.S. Bennett co-host. Informative, fun, irreverent, and politically incorrect. You never know where they'll go, but you'll love the journey. Annie is a top conservative host on Top Talk Radio and features some of the finest guests packed with important politicians and newsmakers. Listen every Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern, noon to 3 Pacific, on the SHR Media Network. Remember, Southern Sense is common sense.
Hey, are you guys listening? This is Shannon from Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM on SHR Media. Join us 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday on SHR Media, on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and Spotify, and Facebook Live at 11 a.m. on Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM at Facebook. You don't want to miss a minute. We've got lots of guests, lots of segments, and lots of interesting things. And let's face it, there's nowhere for you to go, so you might as well tune in. Again, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. We're back live on the air on SHR Media, 7 to 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday, audio and Facebook Live, audio and video. Yes, we are going to do video. Facebook Live, Right Way with Shannon and Mike in the AM. Hope to see you soon.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Well, we're back and I'm nationwide. 27 minutes before the end of this hour. There may be, at this point, a little overtime because I'm going to try to sum everything up as best I can for you and all the listeners and the watchers of this show so that you understand how absolutely critical it is that you vote red. If you haven't already voted, it is absolutely critical. Because the Democrats and the leftists want to punish you. The threats, the retribution, the panels at camps, the desired chain link fences with all that cute little curly concertina wire above stem mostly from the two topics that Democrats and leftists revere uber alles, race and sex. Said it before, going to say it again. I don't believe that there is systemic racism in America. I believe that we have instead, what we have is a congealed glop of America individually and collectively, because most people are good-natured, but moreover, cowardly. There is racism, but it's a two-way street. All paint jobs can be racist. Blacks too. Listen to the rhetoric. Said it before, I'll say it again. Nobody is equal until everybody is equal. Leftists, they're more into 1984, and boy, am I going to make some references to that in a bit. They're into 1984 and Animal Farm these years. Remember the quote, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So let's think about this in terms of racism. And let's be honest. Leftists control just about every major institution in America. Mainstream media, check. Academia, check. Administrative government, check. Bunches of courts, check. Hollywood, check. Big tech, check. Democrat Party, etc. So, if systemic racism really did exist, then I got to ask you, whose fault is that? I repeat, if systemic racism really exists since we've experienced literally decades of leftist and Democrat control in those areas, whose fault is that? That somehow magically it all has to be tackled right here, right now. Why wasn't it a priority years ago? Hell, for that matter, what has Joe Biden done in 47 years? In 1993, let's go back. I'm going to play the Wayback Machine. He actually called something right in 1993 that he said, well, you know what? I think we may have to take back our streets.
It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
That was good for 1993. And I'm going to tell you something that you probably have never heard before from me. Joe Biden was right. I was there. The 1990s were the time of some of the greatest criminal activity and violence in the history of our nation. We haven't even come close to that amount of crime since then. Not even now, when people say that shootings have skyrocketed and we have to get guns off the streets. How do I know? Look at the stats. And I worked detectives, as I've said before, in the 1990s. That's how I got into the Homicide Bureau. A good deal of the suspects I had when I worked the robbery bureau became my homicide suspects. Gangs and drugs were absolutely exploding on our streets. Kids in America, and certainly in Sacramento County where I worked, they were being killed for the wrong colored laces in their shoes or for wearing certain proscribed jackets involving colors. Crime was off the hook, and Americans just wanted it stopped. All Americans. Black Americans. Because they were suffering terribly at the hands of criminals. Black criminals in their neighborhoods. I know because I was there. I had to compile the stats for my areas. So what about that systemic racism by police? Data, I don't know if you know this or not, data has been compiled by the Washington Post, where democracy dies in D.C. Since 2015, on every police shooting in America, and killings by police of unarmed black Americans has gone down every year since they started charting. 2019 showed 10 unarmed black Americans killed by the police. Of the 10, 5 of these, the police officer was attacked before shooting the person. In 4 cases, the officer was charged with the crime. Doesn't exactly sound like genocide of black Americans, as some massively far-left politicians and media personalities have insisted is occurring. And it sure doesn't sound like systemic racism either. Another important stat. 48 police officers were murdered in 2019, according to FBI data. I said, because I've worked there for 41 years, there was no systemic racism in law enforcement. If anything, at least for me, the reverse was true, because I was told by one captain and one sergeant at the time that I was not going to be promoted because I was a white dude and I was, quote, not what the department was looking for. Well, at least, you know what? God bless them, because at least they had the courage to tell me that to my face instead of ignore me. There is no systemic racism in America. Look at the facts. The facts are the exact opposite of what the LDAM now examine. The world, their world, revolves around emotions. So here's Larry Elder speaking with Dave Rubin. And notice this, it's the white guy, the gaup, the guilty, overeducated white person who is perpetuating the systemic racism myth. Well, because Twitter doesn't want to play this, so let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, go ahead.
What do you think the most systemic racist issue is? What is it?
Well, I would
This
say
is Larry
that
Elder.
because black people in most cases, in many cases, were descendants of slaves, that racism as an institution, that it just, a certain amount of it just exists.
2015? Give me the most blatant racist example you can come up with right now.
Here we go.
I think you could probably find evidence that, in general, cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black.
What's your data
than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say. I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that? The idea that a racist white cop and shooting unarmed black people is a peril to black people is BS. It's complete and total BS. And the reason for these so-called activists saying this is the assumption that racism remains a major problem in America. The media, CNN, especially MSNBC, runs down whenever a black cop shoots somebody, and it's some march on Washington. It's ridiculous. Black people, half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides. I'm not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides.
Listen to this.
Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of
Crickets.
social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right. And where's the evidence of the lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media is on it. People are watching it, and justice will for the most part, occur. In Baltimore, where Freddie Gray was killed, Freddie Gray died in a van. I shouldn't say was killed, died in a van.
Yeah.
You have a city that's 45% black. City council is 100% Democrat. The majority of city council is black. The top cop at the time was black. The number 2 cop was black. The majority of the command staff is black. The mayor is black. The AG is black. And yet here we are talking about racism. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd.
So it's funny, I find myself caught in between this a little bit as a liberal, where I want to always try to defend the other. So in this case, the other being black people, I'm always sympathetic to that. And then, at the same time, I hear you laying out a pretty solid case.
These are just the facts. I'll tell you something else, too. There was just a study.
A pretty solid case, meaning he's got facts and you don't.
University of Washington. And it turns out...
Oh, here we go.
Cops were more reluctant, more hesitant to pull the trigger against a black suspect than a white suspect. Probably because of the fear of being accused of racially profiling and the fear that the civil rights establishment was going to come down on him. So if anything, whites are more likely to be shot by a cop under certain circumstances than a black person. And in the last 30 or 40 years, the percentage of suspects killed by cops who are black has declined 75%. However, the percentage of whites killed by cops has flatlined.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, people are more concerned about shooting black people for fear that they're going to be called racist.
Let's stop right there. Let's go to that study. I can find it. I have the internet. Journalists apparently don't have the internet. I have the internet. Here's a story. Police more reluctant to shoot blacks than whites. Study finds. In the most sweeping study of its kind, police were more reluctant to shoot black suspects than their white counterparts, contradicting the widely accepted racist cop narrative driving movements like Black Lives Matter. Instead, this was a Washington State University, just like Larry Elder insists. It was their research, their study, conducted before the 2014 shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson. It lends support to previous studies pointing to a reverse racism phenomenon in policing. We need to move beyond the post-Ferguson atmosphere where all use of force against a racial, ethnic, minority person is considered biased and unreasonable until proven otherwise, concludes the study. Published in the May edition of the academic journal Criminology and Public Policy. I got a copy of that. Where'd I find it? On the internet. And so can you. You know what you got to do, though? Look for it. It's there, but they don't want to look for it. They don't want to tell you about the stats. Here's what BLM leftists, Democrats, Antifa, anarchists, and the like will not tell you. Even so, an examination of shooting errors found the officers were slightly more than 3 times less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than unarmed white suspects, the article said. You didn't hear about that, did you? This is buried, forbidden information. You cannot know it, and you cannot possess it. Brandon Strzok, who was going to be on the show, sat down with a little tete-a-tete, and I played this, I think, Tuesday night. For those of you who weren't here, Brandon Strzok does the unthinkable in a leftist venue. He talks about stats and facts.
The debate topic
Damn
is,
him.
Where is America going on racism and BLM? And what should we be doing next? And we're going to begin with Gay Town Hall and Taisha.
As someone who sits on this panel freely and with consent representing the black populace, as a black person, I find it really hard to have conversations and see these opinions from people who do not look like me and don't share that lens and that reality of that fear walking out the house.
Okay, so because you're a different race, only same race individuals can weigh in on anything having to do with that race. Just ask a leftist.
And being troubled when I see a police officer down the street, knowing that I could be racially profiled at any moment.
We're going to move to Walkway. Who's going to begin for 2 minutes?
I will go.
Okay.
Brandon.
So I just want to start by saying that I may not look like you, Taisha, but I'm just going to give you some numbers, and numbers have no color. They don't lie. So why don't we start with the fact that there are 328 million people in America. There are 41.4 million black people in America, which is 12.6% of the population. Yet 12.6% of the population is committing more than 50% of violent crime in this country. 9 unarmed black men were killed by police in 2019. 9 unarmed. Now, unarmed doesn't mean innocent. Unarmed doesn't mean not a threat. So last year, 0.00022% of the black population was an unarmed black person killed by the police. That is why we are burning America to the ground. That is why we are creating this false narrative of black people being attacked by police based off of 0.00022% of the black population. This represents 0.1% of all black homicides in the entire year of 2019. A police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black man than a black man is to be killed by a police officer. The number of unarmed black Americans killed by police is down 23% since 2015 when Barack Obama was the president. And 93% of black homicides are committed by other black Americans. So if you truly care about black lives, I suggest you get to Chicago, because every weekend dozens of black people are being killed by other black people.
Yeah, that's Brandon Strzok throwing down because he has the facts. So that's obviously why this country so clearly needs reparations, scream leftists and Democrat blacks. Despite there having been, let's see, I have the internet. I went to go look this up. 110,000 white Union soldiers died in the Civil War, apparently for no reason, according to said reparation pimps via the RSIC, or the Racist Sexist Industrial Complex. That's a moneymaker for sure. More untapped places yet to go. And yeah, we'll get to that in the coming Biden America. You can bank on that one. We'll also get a guarantee of continuing violence. There's going to be violence, I believe, no matter who wins. But of course, more violence if Trump wins. Now, this happens to be a story from California. Always spell it with a K. BLM, Antifa, far left promise rioting if Trump wins. Antifa and Black Lives Matter, along with other far left groups across the country, are promising there's going to be riots if Donald Trump wins the re-election and Joe Biden loses. Hashtag because why not? You know what? Like Muslims, maybe you ought to take these people at their word when they tell you something directly to your face. Someday I'm going to go to downtown Sacramento because it's a mess. And we were not that hardly hit compared to Philadelphia, Minneapolis, etc., Atlanta, New York City. New York City! But people evidently think there's no reason why downtown Sacramento shouldn't look like, Baltimore from 1968. There are row house after row house in Baltimore that were never repaired since 1968. And billions with a B dollars have been thrown at Baltimore since 1968. Riots. We're going to have riots because of an election. So what's going to happen is the deep state is going to feel even more emboldened, supported as they're going to be, by those who aren't working against them like the Trump administration has been, which is why he's hated. And we're going to see an unfettering of the lovely Christopher Wray at the FBI, who's going to continue to follow in the self-aggrandizing and blowhard, sanctimonious damn steps of the criminal Jimmy the Leak Comey, as well as the fettering, the necessary concomitant fettering of our local and state law enforcement throughout the nation. Here's what's going to happen. Defunding the police will continue instead of defending the police. And just like they've told us any number of times, one of the earliest priorities, bank on this. One of the earliest priorities is going to be, job one, is going to be the removal of firearms from lawful American citizens. I love this guy. I should have played more videos from this guy. You ever listen to Colleen Noir? He's going to tell us here, perhaps, like I said, hey, we ought to take these guys at their word.
Before you watch this video, if you're pro-gun and adamant about protecting the Second Amendment, This video is not for you to watch, but for you to share with all of your friends and the people that you know who swear up and down that you're crazy and too extreme and that you need to compromise on the 2A stance because these Democratic politicians don't want to take your guns.
No.
They just want reasonable, common sense gun measures. These politicians are like roaches. If you leave even the slightest amount of food out, they will come for it. The same way, if you give these politicians anything on guns, they will consume it and then come looking for more. And they'll bring their homeboys. Prime example, Joe Biden and Robert Francis, or as I like to call them, Roach number 1 and Roach number 2.
This guy can change the face of what we're dealing with regard to guns, assault weapons, regard to dealing with climate change. And I just warning Amy, if I win, I'm coming for it.
Back when Robert Francis said this,
hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
Everyone in the Democratic Party was like, oh no, we don't agree with him. He went too far. We're not that extreme. We just want common sense gun measures. No one's trying to take your guns. No. They all did this fake distancing themselves from Beto, not because they thought his stance was too extreme, but because he actually said it out loud. And they want the appearance of reasonable common sense gun control so that they can get into office and actually push extreme forms of gun control. Now that Biden is looking like he's gonna be the nominee for the Democratic Party, what does he do? Goes back to Roach number 2 so that they can come together and form Roach Voltron so that they can do roach shit in the White House. You can't compromise with roaches. They don't just want some of the food, they want all of it. The only difference here is these roaches can talk and they're savage about it and they're actually telling you what they're gonna do. Biden literally says, we're coming for your guns. And they laugh about it while sitting in Whataburger in Texas, where nearly everyone in a damn restaurant is probably carrying a gun themselves.
It's Texas, so guaranteed, guess what? They were. Robert Francis O'Rourke. Funny you should mention him. Beto, to the people he hoodwinked into thinking that he's anything even remotely close to some kind of a Mexican dude. I have underwear that's more Mexican than he is. He has stated unequivocally what he wants. And what he wants is also what the Democrats want. And he wants you.
Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am, if it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield.
Oh, yeah, that's just the first step.
If the high impact, high velocity round, when it hits your body, shreds everything inside of your body because it was designed to do that so that you would bleed to death on a battlefield and not be able to get up and kill one of our soldiers. When we see that being used...
Hey, that's funny. That's what the .308 round does out of a rifle, a bolt action.
Against children. And in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death.
An AR-15, folks, in case you don't know, is not an automatic weapon.
Over the course of an hour, because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland, there weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Because shootings are absolutely off the hook in 2020, aren't they? I'll wait. But of course, if you are sufficiently stupid to think Democrats and leftists are only coming for your rifles, oh, how wrong you would be. Give them a bit of time. They'll be coming for every damn firearm you own. Not just Joe Biden, the lovely Kamala Harris as well.
Plans for your guns, but more than that, she's willing to threaten Congress if they don't make a law that matches her desires immediately. Watch this.
Do you believe in the mandatory buyback of quote-unquote assault weapons?
I do believe that we need to do buybacks, and I'll tell you why. They are weapons of war with no place on the streets of a civil society.
I will give the United States Congress 100 days to get their act together and have the courage to pass reasonable gun safety laws, and if they fail to do it, then I will take executive action.
Reasonable gun safety laws. What's reasonable? Oh, they'll determine that.
Mandatory buyback. That may be the greatest formulation ever It's like
ask Australia about the buyback. That was voluntary, wasn't it? Just a buyback.
Mandatory donation. It's not a donation, it's theft. A mandatory buyback isn't a buyback, it's seizure.
Thank you.
Obviously. So why does Kamala Harris want to seize your guns? For the babies, of course.
Yeah.
We have to have smart gun safety laws. And we cannot tolerate a society and live in a country with any level of pride when our babies are being slaughtered.
Babies are being slaughtered. Okay, so clearly we
Yeah, abortion doesn't mean anything. It's all about the guns.
have mislabeled Kamala Harris.
Hey, because babies, you know what? They can't push back against government. Fuck them.
Turns out she's one of the few pro-life Democrats in the Senate. Collier Noir is an attorney. He's a Second Amendment advocate. We're happy to have him on tonight. Mr. Noir, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So
Absolutely.
it's for the
Thanks for having me.
babies. So Kamala Harris cares about the babies.
Right.
You obviously don't, since you're for the Second Amendment. Defend yourself.
Well, let's get one thing clear that I think a lot of people aren't really talking about. We're talking about a potential Kamala presidency, not so much a Joe Biden presidency, because his mental acuity is by far in question. That being said, what a lot of people don't understand is she's talking about a gun confiscation. There are a lot of people out there who are new gun owners who are saying, oh, no, well, you know, they're going to let you keep your guns. They just want these. No, it's a gun confiscation. And she, in the clip that you played, she talked about a mandatory buyback. But she did an interview in 2019 where she said she supported a forced gun buyback, which is essentially a gun confiscation.
Yeah.
So they can use whatever pretty fancy words or euphemisms that she wants to use, but what she's talking about is literally taking people's guns. And I think people really need to grasp that and stop falling
may I ask you a
for
question?
all the fancy words that she's putting out there.
So
Yeah.
this just occurred to me. So she's calling for gun confiscation,
right?
A mandatory buyback. That will be enforced with guns, right? So she wants to use guns to threaten people till they give up their guns.
Oh, Tucker, don't you get it? It's governmental guns. Governmental guns are good. Guns in civilian hands, very bad.
There seems to be an irony embedded at the center of this.
Well, she's not inherently anti-gun. No. She's anti-gun for you and I.
Exactly.
But when it comes to her having guns or whoever she has enforced her laws having guns, she doesn't have a problem with that. And this has nothing to do with the babies. It really doesn't. What it boils down to is they really want to take all of the guns. Now, I know that sounds extreme, but let's think about it from a number standpoint. Less than 1% of gun deaths in this country are committed with AR-15s, which she wants to ban. So let's say she does get that ban. Then what is she going to say next whenever we have another shooting that happens to happen?
Thank you. He's going where every logical thinking human being should be going.
What's she going to say next? She's going to have to go to handguns next because, as I stated, less than 1% of gun deaths in this country happen by way of AR-15s.
But wait, I don't think that's the right
number.
number. What percentage of households in counties that are not going to vote for Joe Biden have AR-15s? Like a ton. So isn't that really the point? She's disarming people who don't vote for her.
Pretty much. Now, the thing about it is what's interesting is there have been a wave of people who were otherwise anti-gun and probably are going to vote for her who actually went out and bought AR-15s recently. I
noticed.
Oh, wait, it gets juicier.
Even realize her true stance on this issue.
That is such a good point. Do you have the numbers? I can't remember them, but the number in the increase in gun purchases has been without precedent. Like this never happened before, right?
I'll put it like this. I've been a 2A advocate for almost 10, 12 years now. I've never seen it this high.
Yeah. Well, people understand. People who don't want to buy guns are buying guns anyway because they have no choice. That tells you.
I just hope that they understand that continuing to vote for people like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden is effectively them taking those guns away from them.
That's right. You can't have no police and no self-defense. That doesn't work. Kamala, by the way, we've been instructed to say Kamala, just so you know. Great to see you. Collier Noir, thanks for coming on.
So here's the other interesting aspect, as revealed in more recent news stories. Leftists who don't like what's going on, what they see in front of their eyes in terms of violence and riots and looting, they're buying firearms, but they're being told, logically so, depending upon states' laws, you can't walk out of the store with that rifle or that handgun right now. And almost to an individual, the leftists are saying, "Oh, that's not what I heard. How come I can't get my rifle right now? I've been told that." Yeah, they're discovering that right now. In Chad, in SHR Media Chad, Sergeant Booker makes a very important salient point. AR-15, for example, everybody thinks AR-15 is assault rifle. Nay, na woni wongi wonga. Assault rifle. No, AR stands for Armalite rifle. I had an AR-180 from the Armalite Corporation, drafted and designed by Eugene Stoner. AR stands for Armalite, comma, you ignorant assholes. But I didn't say that. Reason or force, folks, that's our choice. Reason or force. Before I go into reason or force, I just want to let everybody know that this is where you are, and yes, we are going to go into a little bit of overtime.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Having said that, remember I talked and I said reason or force, we have a choice. You fully understand why it is that Democrats have to remove your firearms as quickly into their next term as possible. Because once disarmed, the citizenry has a much more difficult time pushing back against a tyrannical government. Does the Second Amendment exist for the hunter? Bullshit alert. No, it doesn't. Jack would know about this, wouldn't he? A tyrannical government. Just ask Jack about Australia, as he said here any number of times. Reason or force, we got a choice. Here's an article from retired Major Caudill, USMC. He wrote this: human beings only have two ways to deal with one another, reason and force. If you want me to do something for you, you have a choice of either convincing me via argument, or you're going to force me to do your bidding under threat of force. Every human interaction falls into one of those two categories, without exception. Reason or force, that's it. In a truly moral and civilized society, people exclusively interact through persuasion. Force has no place as a valid method of social interaction, and the only thing that removes force from the menu is the personal firearm, as paradoxical as it may appear. When I carry a gun, he wrote, you can't deal with me by force. You have to use reason, and you have to try to persuade me, because I have a way to negate your threat or employment of force. The gun is the only personal weapon that puts a 100-pound woman on equal footing with a 220-pound mugger, a 75-year-old retiree on equal footing with a 19-year-old gangbanger, and a single guy on equal footing with a carload of drunken gangs and bangers with baseball hats. The gun removes the disparity in physical strength, size, or the numbers between a potential attacker and a defender. There are plenty of people who consider the gun as the source of bad force equations. These are the people who think we'd be more civilized if all guns were removed from society, because a firearm makes it easier for an armed mugger to do his job. Now, that, of course, is only true if the mugger's potential victims are mostly disarmed, either by choice or by legislative fiat. It has no validity when most of a mugger's potential marks are armed. People who argue for the banning of arms ask for automatic rule by the young, the strong, and the many. And that's the exact opposite of a civilized society. I'm going to insert this now, and that's what you've been seeing for this past year, haven't you? A mugger, even an armed one, can only make a successful living in a society where the state has granted him a force monopoly. Then there's the argument that fists or bats or sticks or stones don't constitute lethal force. And people who advocate that watch too much TV, where people take beatings and come out of it with a bloody lip or at worst. The fact the gun makes lethal force easier works solely in favor of the weaker defender, not the stronger attacker. If both are armed, the field is level. The gun is the only weapon that's as lethal in the hands of an octogenarian as it is in the hands of a weightlifter. It simply wouldn't work as well as a force equalizer if it wasn't both lethal and easily employable. So he concludes, when I carry a gun, I don't do so because I'm looking for a fight, but because I'm looking to be left alone. The gun at my side means that I can't be forced, only persuaded. I don't carry it because I'm afraid, but because it enables me to be unafraid. It doesn't limit the actions of those who would interact with me through reason, only the actions of those who would do so by force. It removes force from the equation, and that's why carrying a gun is a civilized act. Parenthesis, this is me. That's why government wants to make sure that you are not armed. Let me make this abundantly clear right now. The LDAM, what I call the leftists, the Democrats, and the American media, maggots, are absolutely disinterested in listening to any of your reason. They couldn't care less. The very thought of you, your very existence is anathema to them. Discussion is long past. They're not interested in discussions. You now exist only to be overthrown and forced into submission, with no defense available to you. I wanted to hit this a little earlier, but I'm going to do it now. This is a relatively long article, but it's an article with a capital T in terms of truth. And you tell me if this sounds anything even remotely similar now. This is by a man named Rod Dreher. The article is called America is on the Road to Revolution. And he writes, we have more in common with pre-Nazi Germany and pre-Soviet Russia than we think. In 1951, 6 years after the end of World War II, the political philosopher Hannah Arendt published The Origins of Totalitarianism, in an attempt to understand how such radical ideologies of both left and right had seized the minds of so many people in the 20th century. Arendt's book used to be a staple in college history and political theory courses. With the end of the Cold War 30 years behind us, who today talks about totalitarianism? Almost nobody. And if they do, it's about Nazism, not communism. So, unsurprisingly, young Americans suffer from profound ignorance of what communism was and is. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, a nonprofit educational and research organization established by the U.S. Congress, carries out an annual survey of Americans to determine their attitudes towards communism, socialism, and Marxism in general. Now, in 2019, the survey found that a startling number of Americans of the post-Cold War generations have favorable views of left-wing radicalism. And only 57% of millennials believe that the Declaration of Independence offers a better guarantee of freedom and equality than the Communist Manifesto. Some emigres who grew up in a Soviet-dominated society, they're sounding the alarm about the West's dangerous drift into conditions they once escaped. They feel it in their bones. Reading Arendt in the shadow of the extraordinary rise of identity politics, leftism, and the broader crisis of liberal democracy is to confront a deeply unsettling truth, that these refugees from communism may be right. What does contemporary America have in common with pre-Nazi Germany and pre-Soviet Russia? Arendt's analysis found a number of social, political, and cultural conditions that tilted the ground for those nations to welcome poisonous ideas. Loneliness and social atomization. Totalitarian movements, said Arendt, are mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals. She continues, what prepares men for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience usually suffered in certain marginal social conditions, like old age, has become an everyday experience of the ever-growing masses of our century. The political theorist wrote those words in the 1950s. a period we look back on as the golden age of community cohesion. Today, loneliness is widely recognized by scientists as a critical social and even medical problem. In the year 2000, Harvard political scientist Robert Pultum published Bowling Alone, an acclaimed study documenting the steep decline of civil society since mid-century and the resulting atomization of America. Since Putnam's book, we've experienced the rise of social media networks offering a facsimile of connection. Yet despite that, we grow even lonelier and more isolated. It's no coincidence that millennials and members of Generation Z register much higher rates of loneliness than older Americans, as well as significantly greater support for socialism. It's as if they aspire to a politics that can be replaced by community they wish they had. Sooner or later, loneliness and isolation are bound to have political effects. The masses supporting totalitarian movements, says Arendt, grew out of the fragments of a highly atomized society whose competitive structure and concomitant loneliness of the individual has been held in check only through membership in a class. A polity filled with alienated individuals who share little sense of community and purpose, who lack civic trust, are prime targets for totalitarian ideologies and leaders who promise solidarity and meaning. Losing faith in hierarchies and institutions. Surveying the political scene in Germany during the 1920s, Arendt noted a terrifying negative solidarity among people from diverse classes, united in their belief that all political parties were populated by fools. Likewise, in late imperial Russia, Marxist radicals finally gained traction with the middle class when the Tsarist government failed miserably to deal with a catastrophic 1891 to 92 famine. So, he asks, are we today really so different? According to Gallup, Americans' confidence in their institutions, political, media, religious, legal, medical, corporate, is at historic lows across the board. Only the military, the police, and small businesses retain the strong confidence of anywhere over 50%. Democratic norms are under strain in many industrialized nations, with the support for mainstream parties of left and right in decline. In Europe in the 1920s, says Arendt, the first indication of the coming totalitarianism was the failure of established parties to attract younger members, and the willingness of the passive masses to consider radical alternatives to discredited establishment parties. A loss of faith in democratic politics is a sign of a deeper and broader instability. As radical individualism has become more pervasive in our consumerist-driven culture, people have ceased to look outside themselves to religion or other traditional sources of authoritative meaning. But this imposes a terrible psychological burden on the individual. Many of them may seek deliverance as the alienated masses of pre-totalitarian Germany and Russia did in the certainties and solidarity offered by totalitarian movements. The desire to transgress and destroy the post-World War I generation of writers and artists were marked by their embrace and celebration of anti-cultural philosophies and acts as a way of demonstrating contempt for established hierarchies, institutions, and ways of thinking. Arendt said of some writers who glorified the will to power, they read not Darwin, but the Marquis de Sade. Her point was that these authors did not avail themselves of respectable intellectual theories to justify their transgressiveness. They immerse themselves in what is basest in human nature and regarded doing so as acts of liberation. Arendt's judgment of the post-war elites who recklessly thumbed their noses at respectability could easily apply to those in our own day who shove aside liberal principles like fair play, race neutrality, free speech, and free association as obstacles to equality. Arendt wrote, "The members of the elite did not object at all to paying a price, the destruction of civilization, for the fun of seeing how those who had been excluded unjustly in the past forced their way into it." One thinks of the university presidents and news media executives of our time who have abandoned professional standards and old-fashioned liberal values. Remember what we talked about liberal values, folks? Liberal values mean the individual, property, and not strong government. Old-fashioned liberal values to embrace anti-racism and other trendy left-wing causes. Some left-wing politicians and other progressive elites either cheered for the George Floyd race riots, or like New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, stood idly by as thuggish mobs looted and burned stores in the name of social justice. Regarding transgressive sexuality as a social good was not an innovation of the sexual revolution. Like the contemporary West, late imperial Russia was also awash in what historian James Billington called a preoccupation with sex that is quite without parallel in earlier Russian culture. Among the social and intellectual elite, sexual adventurism, celebrations of perversion, sounding familiar to what we just discussed? And all manner of sensuality was common. And not just among the elites, the laboring masses, alone in the city with no church to bind their consciousness with guilt, or village gossips to shame them, found comfort in sex. The end of official censorship after the 1905 uprising opened the floodgates to erotic literature, a prefiguration of our century's technology-driven pornographic revolution. The sensualism of the age was, in a very intimate sense, demonic, Billington writes, detailing how the figure of Satan became a romantic hero for artists and musicians. They admired the diabolic willingness to stop at nothing to satisfy one's desires and to exercise one's will. Propaganda and willingness to believe useful lies. Hedda Kovali, a disillusioned Czech communist whose husband was executed after a 1951 show trial, reflects on the willingness of people to turn their backs on the truth for the sake of an ideological cause. It's not hard for a totalitarian regime to keep people ignorant. Once you relinquish your freedom for the sake of understood necessity, for party discipline, for conformity with the regime, for the greatness and glory of the fatherland, or for any of the other substitutes that are so convincingly offered, you cede your claim to the truth. Slowly, drop by drop, your life begins to ooze away. Just as surely as if you'd slashed your wrists, you have voluntarily condemned yourself to helplessness. You can surrender your moral responsibility to be honest out of misplaced idealism. You can also surrender it by hating others more than you love truth. In pre-totalitarian states, Arendt writes, hating respectable society was so narcotic that elites were willing to accept monstrous forgeries in historiography for the sake of striking back at those who, in their view, had excluded the underprivileged and oppressed from the memory of mankind. For example, many who didn't accept Marx's revisionist take on history, that it's a manifestation of the class struggle, were willing to affirm it because it was a useful tool to punish those they despised. Consider the lavish praise with which elites have welcomed the New York Times 1619 Project, a vigorously revisionist attempt to make slavery the central fact of the American founding. Despite the project's core claim that the Patriots fought the American Revolution to preserve slavery, having been thoroughly debunked, journalism's elite saw fit to award the project's director a Pulitzer Prize for her contribution. Along those lines, propaganda helps change the world by creating a false impression of the world and the way it is. Writes Arendt, the force possessed by totalitarian propaganda lies in its ability to shut the masses off from the real world. In 2019, Zach Goldberg, a political scientist PhD student at Georgia Tech, found that over a 9-year period, the rate of news stories using progressive jargon associated with left-wing critical theory and social justice concepts shot into the stratosphere. The mainstream media is framing the general public's understanding of news and events according to what was, until very recently, a radical ideology confined to left-wing intellectual elites. And it's a mania for ideology. Why are people so willing to believe demonstrable lies? The desperation alienated people have for a story that helps them make sense of their lives and tells them what to do explains it. For a man desperate to believe totalitarian ideology is more precious than life itself. He may even be willing to help in his own prosecution and frame his own death sentence if only his status as a member of the movement isn't touched, Arendt wrote. Indeed, the files of 1930 Stalinists' show trials are full of false confessions by devout communists who were prepared to die rather than admit communism was a lie. Similarly, under the guise of anti-racism training, U.S. corporations, institutions, and even churches are frog-marching their employees through courses in which whites and other ideologically disfavored people are compelled to confess their privilege. And some do, eagerly. We've seen it, haven't we? One of contemporary progressivism's commonly used phrase, "the personal is political," captures the totalitarian spirit which seeks to infuse all aspects of life with political consciousness. Indeed, the left today pushes its ideology ever deeper into the private realm, leaving fewer and fewer areas of daily life uncontested. This, warned Arendt, is a sign that a society is ripening for totalitarianism, because that is what totalitarianism essentially is: the politicization of everything. Early in the Stalin era, N.V. Krylenko, a Soviet commissar, that's a political officer, steamrolled over chess players who wanted to keep politics out of the game. "We must finish once and for all with the neutrality of chess," he said. "We must condemn once and for all the formula chess for the sake of chess, like the formula art for art's sake. We must organize shock brigades of chess players and begin immediate realization of a 5-year plan for chess." A society that values loyalty more than expertise. Totalitarianism in power invariably replaces all first-rate talents, regardless of their sympathies, with those crackpots and fools whose lack of intellect and creativity is still the best guarantee of their loyalty, wrote Arendt. You guys see where we're going here? All politicians prize loyalty, but few would regard it as the most important quality in government, and even fewer would admit it. President Trump is a rule breaker in many ways. He once said, "I value loyalty above everything else, more than brains, more than drive, and more than energy." The author writes, Trump's exaltation of personal loyalty over expertise is discreditable, and corrupting. But how can liberals complain? Loyalty to the group or the tribe is at the core of leftist identity politics. This is at the root of cancel culture, in which transgressors, however minor their infractions, find themselves cast into outer darkness. Beyond cancel culture, which is reactive, institutions are embedding within their systems ideological tests to weed out dissenters. At universities, within the University of California system, for example, teachers who want to apply for tenure-track positions have to affirm their commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion, and to have demonstrated it even if it had nothing to do with their field. De facto loyalty tests to diversify ideology are common in corporate America, and they've now found their way into STEM facilities and publications, as well as medical science. A Soviet-born U.S. physician told me, after I agreed not to use his name, that social justice ideology is forcing physicians like him to ignore their medical training and judgment when it comes to transgender health. He said it's not permissible within his institution to advise gender dysphoric patients against treatments they desire, even when a physician believes it's not in that particular patient's health interest. And so intellectuals are the revolutionary class. In our populist area, politicians and talk radio polemicists can rile up a crowd by denouncing elites. Nevertheless, in most societies, intellectual and cultural elites determine its long-term direction. The key factor in history is not individual genius, but rather the network and the new institutions that are created out of those networks, writes sociologist James Davison Hunter. Though a revolutionary idea might emerge from the masses, says Hunter, it does not gain traction until it's embraced and propagated by elites working through their well-developed networks and powerful institutions. This is why it's critically important to keep an eye on intellectual discourse, Arendt said. And Arendt warns that the 20th century totalitarian experience shows how a determined and skillful minority can come to rule over an indifferent and disengaged majority. In our time, most people regard the politically correct insanity of campus radicals as not worthy of attention. They mock them as snowflakes and social justice warriors. And he writes, this is a serious mistake. In radicalizing the broader class of elites, social justice warriors are playing a similar historic role to the Bolsheviks in pre-revolutionary Russia. SJW ranks are full of middle-class, secular, educated young people racked by guilt and anxiety over their own privilege, alienated from their own traditions, and desperate to identify with something or someone to give them a sense of wholeness and purpose. Critical. For them, the ideology of social justice, as defined not by church teaching, but by critical theorists in the academy, functions as a pseudo-religion. Far from being confined to campuses and dry intellectual journals, SJW ideals are transforming elite institutions and networks of power and influence. They are marching through the institutions of bourgeois society, conquering them, and using them to transform the world. For example, when the LGBT cause was adopted by corporate America, well, its ultimate victory was assured. Futuristic fatalism. To be sure, none of this means that totalitarianism is inevitable, but they do signify that the weaknesses in contemporary American society are consonant with a pre-totalitarian state. Like the Imperial Russians, we Americans may well be living in a fog of self-deception about our own country's stability. It only takes a catalyst like war, economic depression, plague, or some other severe and prolonged crisis that brings the legitimacy of the liberal demands and democratic order into question, as Arendt warned more than a half-century ago. There's a great temptation to explain away the intrinsically incredible by means of liberal rationalizations. In each one of us there lurks such a liberal, wheedling us with the voice of common sense. The road of totalitarian domination leads through many intermediate stages for which we can find numerous analogs and precedents. What common sense normal people refuse to believe is that everything is possible. If totalitarianism comes, it will almost certainly not be Stalinism 2.0 with gulags, secret police, and an all-powerful central state. That wouldn't be necessary. The power of surveillance technology, woke capitalism, and fear of losing bourgeois comfort and status will probably be enough to compel conformity by most. At least at first, it'll be a soft totalitarianism, more on the Brave New World model than the 1984 one. But it will be totalitarianism all the same. A Czech immigrant to the U.S. who works in academia told me that this, quote, is not supposed to be happening here, but it is. He said, anytime I try to explain current events and their meaning to my friends or acquaintances, I'm met with blank stares or downright nonsense, he says. His own young adult children born in America and indoctrinated into identity politics ideology by public schooling think their father is an alarmist kook. Can anyone blame a man like this for concluding that Americans are going to have to learn about the evils of totalitarianism the hard way? People say, that was the article, people say it can't happen here. I say, yeah, it can. Go find, as he says, for example, some kind of illegal immigrant to this country. Somebody who studied, passed the test, and was sworn in as an American citizen. Go talk to Lily Tang Williams. I've had her on twice on the show. The LDEM, the leftist Democrats, and the American media maggots, ably abetted by them, are and have been telling you their wishes up front for quite some time. You haven't been listening. Their language is less couched because now they got violence to back up their words. Look this up. You think that Kristallnacht can't happen here? You think that a night of 1,000 knives can't happen? Shame on you. I talked about this Tuesday, and I'm going to repeat it now because this is the summary of a presidency under Biden and where leftists and Democrats want to go. It's from 1984. It too perfectly summarizes the goals of leftists and Democrats. Their goal is to help carry their football across the goal line. The American media maggot's goal is to be the propaganda machine for leftists and Democrats. It's their job to help them carry the football across that goal line, no matter what. This is that paragraph I mentioned from 1984, which George Orwell wrote in 1949. Now I will tell you the answer to my question. It is this. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power. Pure power. What pure power means to you, you will understand presently. We are different from the oligarchies of the past in that we know what we're doing. All the others, even those who resembled ourselves, they were cowards and hypocrites. The German Nazis and the Russian communists came very close to us in their methods, but they never had the courage to recognize their own motives. They pretended. Perhaps they even believed that they had seized power unwillingly and for a limited time, and that just around the corner there was a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. We're not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. I should also remind you of this because George Santayana said, "Those who forget the past, they are condemned to repeat it." Folks, bread and circuses, amusement, entertainment. Keep the serfs, the proles, the groundlings, the unwashed rabble, the commoners, the peasants and the subjects. Keep them stupid and ignorant. Don't let them look behind the curtain. So I leave you with this. Another quote from history that's going to resonate now and forever from Pastor Martin Niebohler. Don't let us go here. First, they came for the socialists. And I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. And I did not speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. My friends, the leftists are sure to come looking for you if Biden wins. Vote red.
Monsieur has unlocked!
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for listening to the Bloviating Zeppelin's Berserk Bobcat Saloon radio show, live and direct right here on the SHR Media Network. You want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter at BZEP, at BZEP, my blog at bloviatingzeppelin.net. Promotional consideration is by the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works and also by the Boeing Company. If it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And also by Pratt & Whitney Engines Thrust. You can trust. Tiaras are by My Little Pony. Thanks to my personal KC-135 Kettle One refueling team with whom I will be consorting in less than an hour.
To the folks that I know.
Thanks to Kate KRUZEWSKI for being here. This is my last normal broadcast until after the election. Come back here Tuesday night, election coverage, with me and a number of people on SHR Media. Thanks to everybody for listening in tonight. Thanks for listening live. Thanks to everybody who listened in podcasts. There's a ton of you. Have a great weekend to each and every one of you. God bless. Take care. Be safe. Trump Tuesday.
Everybody quiet down now and get some sleep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mama. Good night, Ben.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Mama. Good night, Daddy.
Good night, children.
Good night, Daddy. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, John Boy. Good night, Jim Bob. Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, Jim Bob.
What's going on? I was asleep. What's everybody doing?
Good night.
Good night, Jim Bob.
Good night, and good luck.